I'm going to tell you a story. I think you'll find that you're familiar with the story. It's a story of two brothers who apparently live in an idyllic world. They are rich beyond measure, they have everything they could ever want or need, or so it appears at first sight. They are part of a loving family. In fact, they are loved beyond anything that can be described by words alone. It's the kind of dream that anyone might wish to find themselves right at the centre of. How can anything possibly go wrong when these brothers are embraced in so much love? A love that is unconditional. They're surrounded by everything they could ever need in such abundance, and it is a place of sheer beauty and wonder. Tradition says that the elder brother is brought up with the expectation that responsibility for their future will pass to him. So as he grows and matures, he is learning how to tend and care for their family estate. He is learning the delicate balance of life, how the animals and the trees and the plants form an intricate web of life in all its richness, contributing to the beauty and abundance of the land that they so enjoy. As he hears all the epic tales passed down from generation to generation, he sees and understands that his role is to protect and preserve the life and land in which he grew up, to nurture and protect his inheritance so that it might flourish and so that he can make sure that he passes on to the next generation something better than he inherited himself. But as his younger brother hears those same sagas of ancient history, he does not hear the call of duty to live at one with the land and to dedicate himself to tend and care for it. He doesn't share that burden of responsibility, you see, that ties him to the land or teaches him the full appreciation of its beauty and delicacy. Unlike his brother, he will never share that responsibility that fills his heart with love for everything he sees. No, he hears those tales of adventure and is drawn to the spirit and excitement of the quest. Instead of being filled with wonder and respect for his home and his land, he is bored with its familiarity. He's drawn to adventure and craves the excitement and intrigue of the unknown. It's almost as if the sameness of his home is a prison cell locking him away from the adventure he deserves. Each day, as the elder brother wakes, he wakes with a purposefulness and deep satisfaction of knowing how interwoven his life is with the balance of nature around him. He feels at one with it and will go to any length to preserve that balance. In contrast, each day the younger brother wakes with the growing void in his soul. His restlessness eats away at him until he knows he must break that bond with his home and all that is familiar. He ceases to have respect for the riches of his life. Instead of gaining pleasure from the beauty all around or of being thankful for his good fortune, he begins to treat everything around him as his entitlement, his right to do with it exactly as he wishes, for his good. As he cares less and less for the world around him, he dreams of ways to use it to support his lust for new adventures and pleasures and excitements. Finding no answer to his selfish needs within the stability and nurture of his loving family environment, he barges into his parents to demand his freedom from all cares. "Mother Earth," he says, "allow me to take what I am owed from this earth. It's my inheritance, and I can't afford to wait any longer before using it to bring me pleasure. I'm going to seek out new pleasures and adventures." As he starts those adventures, he learns to use his vast wealth as a lever to get whatever he wants wherever he goes. No longer is he satisfied with adventure and excitement, but instead he begins to crave the advantage that power brings and the people who flock around him. He learns to plunder and exploit the resources everywhere he goes, discovering new, untapped and apparently limitless excitement. His addiction grows, his arrogance grows, his thirst for power becomes unquenchable as each day he is less fulfilled than the day before. Finally, the buzz that used to motivate him becomes more and more distant, harder to reach. His wealth is largely gone, and with it his status. As his fake friends leave him, all companionship is gone. His isolation and his desolation grow and eat away at him. The destruction he leaves in his wake grows. He becomes truly blind to the pain and suffering he causes. He has spent so long driven by his abusive and selfish nature that all he has left is that deep indifference and hole in his heart where empathy should be. He's now alone in the world that he has made barren, alone with his self-destruction and the growing ache of guilt. Hopelessness, despair and anguish are his new bedfellows. Even his memories of the beauty and caring nature of Mother Earth, the wonderful family home in which he grew up, these too are dimming. Deeper and deeper he falls. Each day begins to look as if it might be his last, as his hunger for adrenaline and excitement turns into starvation. Any scraps will suffice to stave off the pangs and the pain of hunger. Tears refuse to squeeze from his shrunken eyes, no longer able to drink enough to keep his organs working, let alone squeeze moisture into tears with which to bewail his fall. From the depths of rock bottom, finally he grasps a moment of consciousness from his delirium. In that almost final moment, in and out of consciousness, he sees a vision of the beauty of his home before he abandoned it, before his wanton acts set its destruction in motion. As the events of his life whirl through his semi-consciousness, he finally wakes up and sees that he is responsible not just for his own fate, but the death and destruction raging all around him. And in his unfocused, blurred vision, hovering between death and life, his eyes alight upon a seedling growing out of the barren, parched desert land. Summoning his wilting strength, weeping dry tears through the depth of his remorse, he whispers, "Mother Earth, I see now that I am responsible for all this destruction in my greed and my blindness and my self-interest. Am I too late? Will you forgive me? Can you forgive me if I return home? I no longer deserve to return as your son, but Mother Earth, is there still enough time to save you? May I be allowed to serve you and care for you as you once cared for me, unconditionally?" Mother Earth smiles on the reformed son and welcomes him home with his renewed sense of love and his new understanding that the riches of the world are not his to exploit, but will be the fruits of his loving service and his commitment to nature. As Mother Earth shows her resilience and patient forgiveness, the same is not true of the elder brother. He has spent years working harder and harder every year to fight off the death and destruction in nature caused by the vandalism and profligacy of his sibling and others who he engaged with. He has only ever given of his all to the protection of Mother Earth, year by year becoming harder. And though he has enjoyed its beauty and bounty, his growing frustration and impatience has ground him down. He has endured years of false promises of recovery. He's heard repeated commitments to stop the destructive ways, yet none have been met. He has no space left in his heart for trust or belief in the change of heart from his brother. How can he possibly forgive the wantonness that has destroyed everything he loved? how can he find love for that sin, that selfishness? How can he trust in the future and forgive the awful destruction that's taken place? Let's pause at that point. As we finish that story, let's reflect upon that story and come back to what it means later on. So we left ourselves with the allegory of the prodigal son being a reflection of the way we in the developed world have seen and abused the joy of nature, and the elder son, the one who remained close to the very nature of nature, becoming disillusioned. As we look around the world at the lines where the battle with climate change is being fought, so often we find that it is the indigenous and the marginalised groups being threatened by the privileged bully, those whose communities have a bond with nature that remains at the core of their culture, those who love and respect and live in harmony with nature. The isolated tribes in the Amazon under fierce attack by the loggers, determined to turn the land to profit. The Pacific Island communities facing seas depleted of fish by intense factory fishing methods, with blatant disregard for stocks, and now they're challenged further still by rising sea levels and more intense typhoons. Or the Inuit communities finding polar bears encroaching into villages because the sea ice is retreating. We're reminded that it is Mothering Sunday, a day in which girls and young women in service were granted chance to go back to their family and home, having been stranded away from them in their time of service. They were given a holiday to return to their roots of their mother church. We have revisited the story of the prodigal son as the consequence of living lives disconnected from our roots in nature, and instead believing time and again that we are entitled to use all the earth's limitless resources for our own selfish satisfaction, becoming increasingly isolated from the consequence of our actions. And so there is a strong link and bond between the origin of Mothering Sunday and the thoughts about Mother Earth and the prodigal story. As we followed the journey of the prodigal, addicted to wealth and power and consumption, like all addicts, he was gradually becoming inured to the source of that addiction. Having broken the partnership with Mother Earth, we too are addicted to a life in which we draw limitless energy from the earth, in which we see never-ending consumption as an entitlement, being blind to the exploited lives of the marginalised who make the goods we buy and discard so casually. The prodigal reached rock bottom and somehow found a spark of hope to admit the addiction, to own responsibility for the consequence of his addiction, and to begin to rebuild his life. The prodigal was lucky. For too many addicts, the downward spiral is never broken. Whatever hope they have left is vested in that next fix, which of course simply accelerates the descent. Somehow the addict needs to find hope outside their addiction. They need support from those who, unlike the brother, are prepared to trust. They need companionship from those who, unlike the sham friends that money and wealth attracts, are willing to be there when there is no reason, willing to trust where there is a high risk of it being abused, willing to believe that somehow the addict will find a renewed purpose and begin to rebuild respect, self-respect. Our society is addicted to consumerism and particularly to energy consumption. We ourselves are addicted to a greater or lesser extent. Are we prepared to own and admit that addiction? Are we prepared to own our cravings? Are we prepared to be a support group for each other, to wean us off our addiction, to support us through those moments when times are getting really tough, to trust those who give us no basis to trust, to believe that turning round is possible, however dark the future might appear? Because everywhere you look at groups that are supporting addicts to reform, there is that need for ownership, admission, day-by-day admission of the addiction, an addiction that never goes away, that only can be lived with, and lived with the support group that is so powerful, made up of those who share that addiction, and also those who are the allies in reforming from that addiction. It seems to me that we have to learn to own our addiction to those things that are causing climate change. And I wonder, Joan, if you would like to add anything to that from your own experience.
Well, when we were sort of planning this sermon series and starting to look at what the big questions were, I think it was quite a breakthrough we had when we started to think about this as addiction. I took a class when I was at seminary on addictions, and indeed attended an AA meeting for a while during that period. But there's not only AA, there's Narcotics Anonymous, Sex Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, all these groups, and they all have the same 12 steps that they work through from the big blue book. A step of admitting the addiction, of trusting in a higher power, we would call God, and then of doing things like making amends for people that they've hurt during this time. And the groups have a system where they're set up with a mentor, so that if somebody's going through a difficult time, they can call their mentor, and they support each other. They're very close-knit groups that learn to really support each other through difficult times. I've even known them, there's usually been groups in the churches where I have been a minister, and some of them would even meet on Christmas Day, because Christmas Day can often be a tough time to meet.
Yeah, I think that this idea of addiction has grown on us, hasn't it? And it's fascinating that Boris Johnson accused the whole of the West of being addicted to Russian oil recently, which echoes the sentiments that we have, although his answer to that might not be the one we want, of course. But very clearly from what you've said, the Church has much to learn from these addiction groups about the fact that we've got to own where we are and then support each other strongly to get through that. Is there anything else you can think of that we as a church should take on board?
Well, I'm not quite sure that we've all reached rock bottom yet and are starting to climb up. I mean, we're addicted to overconsumption. We're addicted to, our diets even, changing our diets. Yeah. We don't want to change our diets. Where do we buy our food? We're creatures of habit. All sorts of things where we don't want to change. But there's also a group called Al-Anon that I've had in some of my churches, and Al-Anon is for the older brothers and the relatives of the addicts, and they come together to discuss what they're feeling and how they're going through things, and sometimes how to help the addict. And one of the things that's come out of Al-Anon is that you can't fix another person, you can fix yourself, and quite often you are contributing to the addict's problem in the way that you are doing things. And so I think there's some learning to come from that perhaps as well. Yeah, it sounds very much like similar to the importance of allyship in the supporting the black and minority communities, doesn't it? That whole idea of working in a support network for each other. So I think just to finish our thoughts, that the message that we need to take away from here is, are we actually ready to admit the extent of our addiction, and are we ready to learn from those groups that are working hard to support and nurture each other through the difficulty, because addiction never leaves you. Reforming from addiction is being prepared to admit it. Recovering from addiction, I think, is the word that they use. It's being prepared to admit it and recognise that you're always on the slippery slope downwards unless you have that support network in place. And I think for the climate,
for all aspects of justice, be it the Walking with Micah project as well. I think we need to be mindful of our role to support each other and nurture each other through the difficulties ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Joan.
And thank you, David, and thank you for your message and your retelling of the parable this morning.
Thank you.